Om Sudismudipurānānaṁ Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavad Padam Shankaram Lokashankaram. Today we are beginning a new series of a very important text on Advaita Vedanta, that is the non-dualistic school of Indian philosophy. That's the philosophical foundation of this organization. In essence, it talks about one supreme reality, and the supreme goal of human life is to realize this truth. It is based on the idea that creation, humanity is one spiritual family, the oneness and unity of existence. And the author of this book is Shankaracharya. So most of you know. He was born in the year 788 and passed away in 820 AD. This is one school of historians, and according to another school, he was born in the year 778 AD and passed away in 810, 32 years. Now, the most wonderful estimate of Shankaracharya is not found in the writings of any Indian writers. It comes from a most unlikely source. Sister Nivedita was the most prominent, the most well-known Western disciple of Swami Vivekananda. By birth, she was an Irish revolutionary, born in Dublin, Ireland in the mid-19th century. She was an exponent of the new education system, which brought about a new revolution in the concept of children education in 19th century Europe, especially in Germany, France, and UK. She was born in Ireland. Now, she became a disciple of Vivekananda, and Swami Vivekananda gave her a new name, Nivedita, which means the dedicated one. Vivekananda had many disciples, both Indian and Westerners. Perhaps the most surprising, most unforgettable figure is this Irish lady. Now, she was not a Sanskrit Pandit or Sanskrit scholar. In India, you find Sanskrit Pandits who have studied Sanskrit for 50 years, 60 years. Now, you know what she writes about Shankaracharya? It is quoted by so many writers, including Gandhi himself. Gandhi himself said something about Shankaracharya. What the great Shankaracharya achieved in a short lifespan of 32 years, the British Empire could not undo in 190 years. You know, the history of British Empire from a 1757 Battle of Plassey to 1947, 190 years. And Gandhi said they were trying to dismantle India's culture and tradition, India's spiritual heritage. They could not do because a 32-year-old man had established in firm foundation in 8th century AD. What the great Shankara achieved in his short lifespan of 32 years, the British Empire could not undo in 190 years. Dr. Radhakrishnan, in his history in Indian philosophy, second volume, you find a long, wonderful exposition of Advaita Vedanta, Shankara school of Advaita. He also writes something absolutely astonishing about Shankara. But what Sister Nivedita wrote surpasses all of them. So as an introduction to this great man, who is the author of the book that we are going to study from today onwards, I shall just read a few excerpts from her well-known book. The title of the book is The Web of Indian Life by Sister Nivedita, Miss Margaret Noble, with an introduction by Rabindranath Tagore, who was a Nobel laureate in India. Now I shall tell you something about what she writes about Shankaracharya. There is no greater estimate of a great Indian scholar, writer, or saint by a Western author is more moving, more comprehensive than Sister Nivedita's own estimate. So I'm just reading from this book, The Web of Indian Life, page 178 onwards. So he's talking about this unique phenomenon in India called the incarnations or avatars, who are teachers who appear from time to time, who rejuvenate Indian culture and tradition, giving a new interpretation, and then new commentary, new exposition, handing out to the next generation, thereby making it immortal and eternal, giving a new interpretation. In every age, a great teacher comes with a new interpretation and he hands over to the next generation. Now, she writes, already in the era we are considering, this organic law of the national genius, the law of avatars, incarnations, was well known. And she's quoting a verse from the Gita that we finished in the last session, concluded. Whenever the dharma decays, and when that which is not dharma prevails, then I manifest myself. God manifests himself at a time when dharma deteriorates and adharma, the opposite of dharma, becomes prevalent. For the protection of the good, for the destruction of the evil, for the firm establishment of the national righteousness, I am born again and again. So says in the Bhagavad Gita. And never was any prophecy more conclusively vindicated than this by the appearance of Shankaracharya early in the 9th century after Christ. This wonderful boy, for he died at the age of 32. Remember, he became a monk when he was 6-year-old. Had already finished all his writings by the time he was 16 years old. Had finished his education before he was 8. Ashtame Chaduro Vidwan, Dadase Sarva Shastravid. That's how the ancient verse goes like that. In this great Shankara Digvijaya, great biography of Shankaracharya in Sanskrit. Was born at the end of the 8th century and already completed a great mission when most men are still dreaming of the future. That means you can imagine when some of the students going to the nearby preparatory school are still studying. Shankaracharya already finished all his classical writings by 13 year, 14 year. And I should tell you, there's a great Chinese visitor, Chinese pilgrim who came to India about 120 years, 110 years before Shankaracharya. His name was Huang Sang. And he's well known. Today if you go to China, mainland China, now in Taiwan, before the Cultural Revolution, the communist takeover in China, there's huge monasteries with very huge libraries, which are repositories of the great Sanskrit textbooks, ancient manuscripts, the translations into Chinese of the great Buddhist works in Pali and Canon. Pali, Canon and Sanskrit language. Thousands of these manuscripts were taken by this great pilgrim who came to India in 602 and he passed away 663. And he had translated all the Mahayana Pali Canon into Chinese language. So he talks about Shankaracharya, who was born 110 years after he left India, but he talks about the great Vedic culture that he found prevailing in the 6th and 5th century in India. Now, Sister Nivedita continues. This literary convention obtains all Oriental countries and must date from the period when the main function of writing was to assist memorizing. The problems which faced the Indian mind during his lifetime, the time of Shankaracharya, with the single exception that the country was then rich and prosperous, must have been curiously like those of the present day. And it is difficult to avoid a conclusion that in his eyes they assumed national dimensions. So what Shankaracharya did was, he found a new method to write commentaries on the Sutra literature. And these commentaries constituted the masterpieces of his creation, his writings. Religious practices had lost their primitive simplicity and also perhaps their compelling power. At this moment, the whole of national genius awoke once more in Shankaracharya. Amidst all the brilliance and luxury of the age, in spite of the rich and the florid taste of the Puranic period, his soul caught the mystic whisper of the ancient rhythm of the Vedas and the dynamic power of the faith that lead the soul to super consciousness, and became for him the secret and every phase of Hinduism. So Vedas became the genius of Hinduism for Shankara. His entire work was to give a philosophical, spiritual meaning to Vedic literature. Now I will tell you something very interesting. You know, this Vedanta society, this is one of the most important branches of Ramakrishna Mission, which was founded by Vivekananda in 1900 in San Francisco, this organization. Vedanta means the highest reach of Hindu spiritual philosophical evolution. This is the creation of Shankaracharya. Before Shankaracharya was born, Vedic hymns, Vedic mantras never had a fixed philosophical implication. Vedas were at least 7,000 years old. Shankara came in 8th century AD. And there were a number of commentaries written on the Vedas. Right from 7th century BC onwards, you can find Veda Nikhandu, called Vedi Nikhandu. Then there is the Niruktam Vada, the well-known commentary. Not commentary, simple meaning like a thesaurus of with some, they give what you call a number of synonyms of a single Vedic sound. Vedodhanadva, Divanadva, like that he calls it. So just an attempt to give some philosophical meaning to the Vedas. That's all. Vaishwanara Kasmat, how the name Vaishwanara came out. Vishwanaran Naididi Vaishwanara. Like that, some kind of what you call a kind of thesaurus kind of book. 8th century BC and 7th century BC. And again, there were some commentaries giving a very ritualistic interpretation of Vedic literature, but not a philosophical interpretation. Vedas never had a real metaphysical dimension before Shankaracharya came, because the Upanishads were not given proper importance or significance by the early commentators. Now we are coming to that. At this moment, the whole of the national genius awoke once more in Shankaracharya. He was on fire with the love of the Vedas. His own poems have something of their classical beauty and vigor, and his books may almost be described as chains of quotations from the most piercing and comprehensive sentences of the Upanishads, to which he has contributed links and rivets. But see, he also, this Shankaracharya we are talking about, he was not only the greatest philosopher of India, he was also the greatest devotional poet of India. And we are going to that. We will come to that in the next paragraph. And then he talks about Shankaracharya. He wandered during his short life from his birthplace in the south as far as the Himalayas. Born in extreme south, southwest. Walked all the way to Indo-Chinese border, in the Tibetan border today's time, Badrinath, Kedarnath, 16,000 feet above the sea level. So he walked from sea level to 16,000 feet above the sea level, vertically, south to north. And he walked from the Bay of Bengal on the eastern side to the Arabian Sea on the western side. And his images, his sculptures, his granite inscriptions were found even in what is now called Kabul, Kandahar in Afghanistan. And everything he came across in his travels related to itself the focus of the entire sager. He accepted each worship. What he did, he did not reject anything. What he did was, he found so many different sects and groups and so many different ways of worship and practices in India. He accepted all of them. He did not reject any. Then he said, these are all different ways of worshipping the same divine reality. So if you go to Bay Area, you find the Shiva Vishnu temple. You can find an army of gods and goddesses in Hindu temples. So people sometimes ask this question. When I went to this Presbyterian church recently for an interfaith program, they asked, so many gods and goddesses in Hinduism? Shankaracharya said in 8th century, these are all different expressions of the same divine reality, which is present in everyone, present in everything, which is transcendental reality. So, whether Christians call God one name, Muslims call different name, Buddhists call different name, all these are different names, different definitions, different approaches to understand and define the same one supreme reality. This idea came from Shankaracharya. Western people can hardly imagine a personality like Shankaracharya. Now, Sister Nivedita writes something very interesting. She was herself an archetypal Western intellectual. Her writings are so absolutely marvelous. She was a great scholar in Christian theology, both in Catholic and also in non-Catholic denominations. She knew Latin and Hebrew and Greek. She was a firebrand modern scholar. And she writes, Western people can hardly imagine a personality such as that of Shankaracharya. And she's going to explain why. In the course of so few years, 32 years, and he became a monk when he was 6-year-old. In the course of 32 years, you have nominated the founders of no less than 10 great monastic orders. If you go to India, anywhere, it's in my mission, if you go nearby, Amruthananda mission somewhere, anybody with this cloth, all of them belong to one of the 10 monastic orders that Shankaracharya founded. 10 monastic orders. And she compares him with Ignatius Loyola, with the founder of the Sioux order. In the course of so few years, to have nominated the founders of no less than 10 great monastic orders, of which 8 or 9 of them have fully retained their prestige to the present day, including our own tradition belongs to one of Shankaracharya's own order. To have acquired such a mass of Sanskrit learning as to create a distinct philosophical system, the most surprising, the most profound metaphysical system of Oriental tradition, Advaita Vedanta, and to impress himself on the scholarly imagination of India in a preeminence that 1200 years have not sufficed to shake. What Vivekananda did was nothing but to give new orientation to Shankaracharya's philosophy. But Chinmayananda did was nothing but to try to give a new orientation, his own orientation, getting inspiration from Vivekananda. What the Divinely Society founder Swami Shivananda of Rishikesh did was again another way to explain Shankaracharya's own philosophy. That's the idea. That's what to understand that. To have written poem which whose grandeur makes him unmistakable. He was also the greatest devotion poet of Indian tradition. No less than 138 poetical classics, devotion poetical classics, each of them equally grand and great. And even to the foreign unlearned here, if you listen to one of his poems, you need not know Sanskrit. Because every poetical work has a way of communicating even to those who don't know the language. That's one sign of a great poet or a great musician. If a musician can have an appeal only to somebody who knows the language in which he has composed that music, then he's not a great musician. True music finds its way to everyone, irrespective of what language in it is written. Because music has its own distinct spiritual language, which is not language of this world, not language of words, language of the soul. And if you listen to Shankaracharya's music, you can see that happening. 130 years classical works, plus about 78 important Sanskrit classics. We contemplate with wonder. This is the most important sentence which I am going to read right now. It will be quoted by so many authors, both Western and Eastern. Even a great man like Raymond Panikya, who wrote a well-known book, is an English translation of the Rig Veda. It's called Vedic Experience. He was half Spanish, half Indian. Raymond Panikya was a great Christian theologian. He also quotes this sentence, which I'm going to quote now. We contemplate with wonder and delight the devotion of Francis of Assisi, the intellect of Abelard. Abelard, he was a great French scholastic philosopher, logician, theologian, he's a poet, a composer, a musician. A great man is a French scholar, Abelard. The force and freedom of Martin Luther. And this man also was a great revolutionary. But he didn't destroy anything. Martin Luther, he threw away the water and also the baby. But what Shankaracharya did, he retained the baby and he threw away the dirty, filthy water. That's all. So Shankaracharya retained all that is grand and great in Hinduism, but he reformed it without losing anything of its pristine purity. At the same time, he gave it a new orientation. And you can find his creative power in Vivekananda, in any of the great Indian scholars who brought Indian wisdom to the United States in 19th century, 20th century, or even these days. So we contemplate with wonder and delight the devotion of Francis of Assisi. He's the founder of the Jesuit order, Catholic monastic tradition. And the force and freedom of the revolutionary spirit of Martin Luther. He was a great revolutionary who fought against the existing orthodox schools of Vedic philosophy, who denied the world of Vedas, the study of the Vedas to common people. The proficiency of Ignatius Loyola. But who could imagine all these united in one person? It's a question mark. So with this I will stop this interesting quotation. Just wanted to know something about the author of the book that we are going to discuss today. Now, those of you have got a text, some of you may have. You can keep that book with you, or when you listen later and online, you can. The first verse, this book is called. The book is called Vivekachudamani. Its English translation is called the Crest Jewel of Wisdom, spiritual wisdom. Vivekachudamani, the Crest Jewel of Wisdom. So I just begin the book today, and as we proceed, we will come to know more about the great man who wrote this book and also the contents of this text. So at the very beginning, he follows the conventional practice of paying obeisance to his teacher. And his teacher was Govinda Bhagavatpada. Now remember, he was born in the southwest, what is now known as Kerala, and walked almost 1,300 miles. In 8th century, there were no roads, so you can find there are many, many books written on his life, all in Sanskrit. He went all the way to a place called near Indore in Madhya Pradesh today, and there he met his guru, his teacher. And his teacher's name was Govinda Bhagavatpada. He comes to the lineage of a great succession of Vedantic teachers. So first he pays obeisance to his teacher. Sarva Vedanta Siddhanta Gocharam Tama Gocharam Govindam Paramanandam Sadgurum Pranadosmyaham. This is the first verse. Actually, it's not part of the text. It is only paying respect, tribute to his teacher. So he says, I pay my respect, my tribute to the great teacher, the Govinda. Even sometimes, these traditional scholars, will give a lot of important meaning to many of these words. And those of you who are interested, the most authentic commentary written on this Vivekachudamani is the one written by one great Swami. His name was, the name of the Swamiji was the abbot of Sringeri Mutt, one of the 4 mutts founded by Shankaracharya. He founded 4 mutts in 4 distant corners of India: Sringeri in the south, Bedri in the north, and Dwaraka in the west, and Puri in the east. And there was a great monk, Chandrasekhara Bharati. He lived in the early 20th century. He is the great commentator of, in Sanskrit, you can find any number of English translations and commentaries, but the most authentic, traditionally the most accepted and acceptable commentary is the one by Chandrasekhara Bharati in Sanskrit, which of course I won't be reading. I will be quoting, reciting some important statements from his book just to give an idea of the traditional approach. So he says, Gobhik Upanishad Vagbhihi Eva Vidyade iti Govinda. So the name of the Guru itself has a name, means somebody who can, a person who understands the meaning of the great Vedantic statements. Anyone who is understood, defined and recognized by the Vedas, and the one who recognizes the truth of the Vedas. So these are 2 types of interpretation you find. Anyway, and he is the knower of the essence of Vedantic knowledge, Vedantic wisdom. And then that Vedantic wisdom is beyond definition, beyond description, it's beyond empirical perception. The supreme truth is the knower of the supreme truth. I pay my respect to him, I pay my obeisance to him, I bow down to him. This is the first, the invocation you may call, a kind of giving respect to the teacher. Now comes the first word. Jantūnām nara janma durlabham adapumstvam tado viprada tasmad vaidika dharma marga parado vidyuttam asmatparam atmanatma vivechanam sanubhavo brahmatmana samsthitihi muktirno shatagodi janma sukudaihi punnehi vinalabhyade. The symbol, it's not simple, but I explained it will be very simple. What it means is, now, the greatest gift that we have in this world is not the money in the bank, health or wealth or anything, or a status, but this human birth itself is the greatest gift. Human beings alone can think of the meaning of human existence. An animal cannot think of the meaning of birth, life and existence. Animals can only think in terms of what they need for the physical sustenance. But human beings alone can think of the meaning of human life. Why am I here? How I came into this existence? Where am I going? What's the purpose of human life? Is it enough just to have money, wealth and status and health and wonderful things of this world? As you look around, you find everything comes for some time, exists, and then disappears. Even if you think of this universe itself, you have to think in terms of some billions of years. If you think of human life, maybe 100 years, 95 years, average, if you live a very healthy life. That means, if you think yourself in terms of the physical body, we are just a momentary existence, not different from animals, not different from the trees and mountains. They live longer, actually speaking. So Jantūnām, the literal meaning is Janana Shīlānām, means anything that is of the nature of being born, anything that comes into existence. Now, there is nothing wrong in coming to existence. But when you say something comes into existence, you also have to admit that it may cease to exist sometime in future. Nothing in this world which is existing can claim to exist for all time. So the very truth of birth implies the unfortunate, tragic truth of possible death, maybe after 100 years. Poverty and wealth, health and ill health, all these come in like two sides of the same coin. So anything that comes into existence will have to cease to exist. So all living beings called Jantus, they are bound to disappear one day. They go through these 6 changes. It's not a pessimistic or skeptical attitude. It just tells us that you who live in this world, you do your best to acquire all the good things of this world, but remember, tomorrow they may not be there. It doesn't mean that we should run away from this, but it gives us a sense of common sense. It makes us wise. When we need the good things of this world, but when we think that these are the only things that we should desire for, then we should remember all these things will one day disappear. The transient nature, the impermanence of everything in this world. That gives us a sense of wisdom, a sense of balance. Again, Vedanta is not a philosophy of running away from the world. Vedanta is actually a way of confronting this world in a more intelligent manner, in a more creative, more meaningful manner. That's a sense of Vedanta. Very often you can find a lot of wrong interpretation. Vedanta is something skeptical, cynical. It is a kind, you're running away from the world of realities. No, rather we are facing the world of realities, only we are facing it in more intelligent manner. Not like a child, but as an adult. So, when we understand being born in this world as a human being, and being born as a human being with some spiritual wisdom, with some spiritual inclination, that is something rare. So human life itself is something rare. And again, being born with some spiritual tendencies, spiritual aspirations, it is even much more rare. And again, the ability or with the good fortune to study some spiritual literature, spiritual ideas, that is even much more rare. And again, so it goes on saying, first, human life is a very rare gift from God. Surprisingly, in this book, it is a book on spirituality, but it doesn't tell you to go to a temple and pray and surrender your freedom to a powerful, muscular, big, hefty man living above the clouds and you surrender, ask him for your forgiveness. No. This book tells us to find out the essence of our reality, our true nature. So, the text is preparing us to boldly face the truth of this world and the truth of our existence. So first, it is called Narajanma Prashamsa, means praising the very gift of being born as a human being with the spiritual inclination, spiritual aspiration, with a tendency to direct our attention not only to things of this world, but also to some higher values, higher truth. And then again, Atma, Anatma Vivechanam, Sunubhavo, Brahmatmana Samsthiti. So, Atma, Anatma Vivechanam. Atma means the divine truth, the divine spark that is present in all of us. Not the body-mind complex, not the senses, but rather something beyond all this, something that's essence of our true nature. Now, once we realize that we are not the physical body, we are not just the mind and intellect, then what happens is we'll be able to face the problems of this world in a more intelligent manner. This is an important point to remember. Vedanta helps us to live in this world and do our duty, go about duties and responsibilities in a more intelligent, in a much more meaningful manner, by recognizing the fact that everything in this world is transient. That again doesn't mean that you run away from this world. That is a very, very misleading interpretation of Vedanta. You can find everywhere. Vedanta tells you that this world is a home of misery. Everything is bad, everything is cynical. So go away from here, somewhere sit in a forest. That precisely not the opposite of what Vedanta is teaching. What Vedanta tells us is, live in this world. You can be working in a Intel or my Oracle or Microsoft, whatever may be the work you are doing. But instead of working for 16 hours and piling up all the money and then taking 4 pills every day for getting 4 hours sleep and finally going to suffering from depression, homelessness, instead of these tragedies of life, Vedanta helps us to keep our mental health intact. Frequently, it is said one of the great medical scientists of it called Charaka. Charaka was a great medical scientist, Charaka Sutras, Charaka Samhitas. So he defines mental health in his own unique language. It's prasanna atma indriya manaha. Atma indriya mana means your mind, senses and metabolism. Of course, the earlier verse is, samadosha samaknischa samadhatu malakriyaha prasannatmendriya manaha susthaha iti avidhiyate. So sustha means a healthy person. Sustha means a mentally, physically healthy person. So what is the sign of a healthy person? The sign of a healthy person is not somebody who is always worried about the physical body. Because the moment you worry about physical body, that's the first sign that you're unhealthy. When our head is reminding us of its existence, it means big headache. When your hand is reminding of it means there is a wound in the hand, there is a pain, it reminds you. It takes your mind towards itself. So when we can totally forget the body, it means body is in perfect shape, perfect health. When we need not worry about the mind, that means mind is in perfect shape. We don't have to worry about mind. Now we'll be able to stop worrying about the body and mind, not at the level of body and mind, but when we are at a higher level, at a spiritual level. When we identify ourselves with Atman, then only we'll be able to live in this world and be happy about it. That will be Atma Anatma Vivechanam. It's called Mananam in the traditional Sanskrit. First you read some good books, listen to some great ideas, then think and contemplate, going deeper to the meaning of what you heard. And then discerning wisdom, Atma, Anatma, Vivechanam. The discerning wisdom between what is Atman, what is eternal, and what is Anatman, what is non-eternal. Everything in this world is non-eternal. There is only one reality that is eternal. That's our true nature. So if you can identify also with what is eternal, what is everlasting, what is immortal, then we don't have to worry about what is mortal, what is impermanent. It doesn't mean that we should forget the world of reality, we should run away from the world. No. We'll be able to look at the world and confront the world and face the world, it's all these problems, in a more intelligent manner, in a more sensible manner. This spiritual common sense is the message of Vivekachudamani. Viveka means discerning wisdom. Viveka means discerning wisdom. Chudamani, crest jewel. Viveka is nothing but the ability to develop this spiritual common sense, which again not running away from the world, but facing the world in a more intelligent manner, from a wise man's perspective. Living this world but not be shocked by it. So that's why at the very beginning the teacher tells you, first of all, you should congratulate yourself that you are born as a human being. And again you had the good fortune to go to the library and read this Vivekachudamani. Instead of reading some thriller, Terminator 1 number, Terminator, some horrible, terrible things that fill your mind with all kinds of fears and depression and going to sleep, not being able to sleep. Instead of that, going to the library, picking up a copy of something like this, that is another piece of gift from God. So, and again, a natural tendency, spiritual tendency for studying, practicing spiritual values, then the ability to become, to be learners, to study, vidduttum. Then beyond all this, Atma, Anatma, Vivechana. Finally, at least intellectually, we have to understand. Maybe we have not reached the experience level, but intellectually we should understand our true nature is not that we are this body. Our true nature is this, that we are Atma, we are the eternal. So this Shankaracharya referring to the Chandrasekhara Bharati, he says, Bhavagīdāsu asoja nannasojastam praඥāvādām sabhāshase gadasu nagadasum nanusojanti panditaha. It's a verse from 2nd chapter of the Gita, 11th verse. That's the beginning of Lord Krishna's instruction. Iti lokavad Vivekachudamani prakarana pratibadya krishnartha sangrahagoyam slokaha jandunam ityadi. So what the teacher tells you, this commentator tells you is, in the Gita, the original discussion begins only with the 11th verse of the 2nd chapter. That is, Ashoja Nannasojastam Prajñāvādām Sabhāshase, etc. Lord Krishna's instruction begins with the 11th verse of the 2nd chapter. Like that, here also the text begins with this. And how does it begin? By congratulating you to be born as a human being. And also, beyond all that, considering the human life and also this tendency, this aspiration for knowing something about spirituality and then going in search of consolidating this interest. This is a rare gift from God. So once we are convinced that it is a gift from God, then we will make a best effort to make use of it. This is a rare gift from God. So this discussion continues. We will have the further discussion, the next session. You can ask questions. You are most welcome to ask any question, either from this session or the session that we concluded last week, Gita. Okay. You are most welcome. Yeah.
Swamiji,
yeah.
Shankaracharya and Ramana Maharshi are both associated with Lord Shiva. Could you explain that?
Yeah. You find in Indian tradition, this Advaita Vedanta, the non-dualistic system of philosophy, is closely linked to Shiva tradition, Shaiva tradition, more or less. Most of the great Advaitic commentators, non-dualistic philosophers, had this inclination. And Shankaracharya is considered to be an incarnation of Shiva. Shiva had only one incarnation, that is Shankaracharya. So his mother went and prayed. Parents went and prayed to a famous temple, walked some 40 kilometers through forest, went there, prayed to Lord Shiva. And there's a story that goes like that, There are a number of biographies on Shankaracharya, all in Sanskrit verse. And the most famous one is the one written by Vidyaranya, who is himself the abbot of one of the mutts that Shankaracharya founded, Sringeri Mutt. So there it is clearly mentioned, when Shankaracharya's parents went to pray to Lord Shiva, they were without children, so they prayed for long years. Shiva appeared and told them, well, do you want a child who will be short-lived, very brilliant, highly accomplished, but short-lived? Or a very dull, but live for 100 years? Whom do you want? The parents told, we would rather have a child who is short-lived but brilliant, who will do credit, will justice their reputation of the family. So he was born and he was destined to live only for 16 years. And then when that time came, it is said Vyasa, the great teacher, appeared and extended his life for another 16 years for accomplishing all the great things that he accomplished in later years. He already written all the commentaries, all the intellectual works he had completed by 16th year. It was time for him to die. So at that time the great sage appeared and by his spiritual power extended his life by another 16 years. And during those years he travelled all over Indian subcontinent 4 times and accomplished all the great things, all the 10 monastic orders, hundreds of temples, 4 monasteries in 4 distant corners of Indian subcontinent. And writing all these marvelous poetical classics. All that he did during the latter half of his life, 16 years. So Ramana Maharshi, on the other hand, Ramana Maharshi had this this incident, accidentally he came across this truth of death. His father was living with him and then father died. So that made him ponder over the mystery of human life and death. And later on he could not control himself. He left his home, came to the Ramana hills. He must have done some meditation inside the temple, but eventually he withdrew into a cave and there he did meditation. So he was also a great devotee of Shiva. Shankaracharya was a devotee of all deities. You can find him writing marvelous devotional poetical classics on Shiva, Vishnu, Devi, all conceivable deities in Hindu tradition. But he said all these are different names of the same one reality. People wrongly think that Hinduism believes in polytheism. No. It is monism, not even monotheism. Even monotheism is something at a lower level of Vedanta. The highest level is monism. When you think of God as one supreme deity, the controller, the creator of this world, the one who listens to your prayers and fulfills your prayers and aspirations, that is accepted, fully accepted. But Vedanta tells you there is even a higher state. Well, I often tell them when I discuss this, I give a series of lectures in Stanford, students sponsored program every Sunday, 6 o'clock, The only teacher in the Western world who approaches Shankaracharya's Advaita is Meister Eckhart, who said that even to define God as Holy Trinity is a blasphemy, is an imperfection, because God cannot be defined even as Holy Trinity. When you define something, you are limiting it. That is, verbalization is a limitation. It's a 13th century German Dominican priest. So he was the one whose philosophy comes very close to Shankaracharya's system of monism, going beyond even monotheism. You are right, there is an aspect of Shiva in all non-Advaitic systems of philosophy, Advaita systems of philosophy.
Thank you, Swamiji, for the lecture.
Yeah.
My question is the general thought and idea in these in this school of thought is that, like, for example, the teachings of Gita or the general essence of Vedanta is that it takes several lifetimes for a person to intellectualize it and then fully understand it and live it. It's not something that someone can achieve. It's a long journey, and it's not something one can achieve in their own in a single lifetime.
Yeah, so your question is, if we have to learn Sanskrit, study all these books and intellectually understand and contemplate, no. Paul Brunton was a British journalist living in New York. Somehow he happened to read an article on Ramana Maharshi, published in a newspaper, most probably the one written by one of the Swamis in our order, Swami Siddheswarananda. An article published in the Hindu newspaper. And he took a ship and went to Chennai. And there he met the Shankaracharya of Kanchi Math, who told him, you go to Tirunamala, there is your teacher. That is the beginning of a new life. You find, a British journalist living in New York in the early decades of 20th century needed only one article that he happened to read to connect with Advaita. You find people living in India close to Ramana Maharshi's ashrama. They don't care for him. They don't go there inside. They'll be reading some maybe cowboy novels. But Indians living in Benares or in some pilgrim centers in India, where they can go and study Advaita Vedanta very quickly, will be reading cowboy novels. An American journalist living in an apartment in New York, he happens to read just one article on Ramana Maharshi. He takes a ship and goes there. It's a beginning of new life for him. Entirely new chapter began for him, So where do you place yourself? So your tendencies do not belong to this life alone. In your previous life, not one, but many, many life cycles, you may have accumulated a lot of spiritual tendencies. When they reach a state of perfection, maturation, then you cannot but read anything else other than these higher ideas. It's an important point to remember. So, when you are right in one way, it needs a lot of effort and preparation. But then you have to remember, you had not just one life, you had several life cycles in the past. Where you began, nobody knows. You may have begun your journey maybe 2000 years ago. And now this is 21st century. So where did you begin your journey? That's what decides how much distance you have yet to travel. Paul Brunton didn't have to travel a long distance. He didn't think much. Just took a ship and went to India. There are many such examples. If you go to Indian ashramas in the Himalayas, bearded people, rudraksha wearing people, they are not crazy people. Some of them are well-placed professionals, give up everything, and they want to spend their time in the Himalayas. Why? Because they were doing some of these things in the previous life. I can give an example. You heard of Holy Mothers, Holy Mother, Sriram, no, Holy Mother, great. Holy Mother, 1911, around that time, she was visiting Benares, Kashi. That's a place where Buddha gave his first sermon after his enlightenment, after he got his enlightenment in Bodh Gaya. He straight walked to Benares, and there he gave his first sermon to seven, according to some Sutta Pitaka, 7, there may be more, according to some other sources, sages, and he taught them, he started his sermons there. Now, Holy Mother was visiting this place, and in 1911, perhaps, the number of Westerners, Europeans, Americans, we don't know, they were staring, they were marveling at the ancient relics of Buddhist monasteries. Some of them destroyed by Muslim invaders, for almost 600, 700 years, invasions were going on. Many of the Buddhist monasteries, temples were destroyed, viharas destroyed. So these Westerners were staring at them. Then Holy Mother told some of her disciples, look here, these very people, they in the previous life, they built all this. Now they have come back, they're staring at their own creation, the relics of their own buildings. You can find in the life of Holy Mother Sri Sharada Devi. So don't think, oh, this is only written in Sanskrit, so I have to study Sanskrit for 20 years, so better forget about it. No. If your mind, if your samskaras, tendencies, vrittis, they are ready, then if you go to your home, if you go back to your home and if you start reading Vivekachudamani, you won't stop reading it. On the other hand, if you are living in Benares, it's a center of Vedic learning. You may have people, scholars all around you, you may not touch the book. You would rather read cowboy novels. That also can happen. So Paul Brendan living in New York apartment can connect with Vedanta. People living Benares also connect with something else. Geographical, cultural barriers are absolutely no hindrance. Our own samskaras, our own tendencies and impressions were gathered in previous life cycle that make us ready for what is our next step forward. Okay, thank you for the question. Yeah.
Sri Aurobindo speaks about an inner guru and a universal guru, and he also mentions the evolution. As a human being evolves, they gradually become more spiritualized, enlightened. So it's an evolutionary issue here, and how to excel, how to increase the evolutionary momentum for self-realization or God realization, if you will.
You know, according to Vedanta, you can speed up your evolution if you work hard. Intensity can reduce the time requirements, the duration of time requirement. So evolution is a constant process. Aurobindo's concept of evolution from matter to Superman is nothing but a modern bombastic interpretation of Shankaracharya's concept of chitta vritti, spiritual fitness of the mind. As you evolve, move forward, as your mind becomes more and more pure, it becomes a better instrument for realizing the supreme truth. And the point to remember is, all these ideas will make sense only if you remember, that's a given, that is the doctrine of law of karma and the doctrine of reincarnation. These two fundamental principles are always inherent in Hindu, Vedantic, Buddhist, Jain traditions. This is an important point to remember. So, what we are fit for is not necessarily determined by what we have experienced in this life, in one life, but it has something to do with what we have accumulated all these life cycles in the past. You won't feel at home with a new idea if you are totally alien to it, strange to it. So you can just imagine, suppose a student studying physics. If you are a school teacher, if you are in a primary school teacher, and suddenly you find one student shows some extraordinary skill to understand, to learn what you are teaching, totally different from others. So there are many possible explanations. One explanation is getting private tuition in his home. His parents are teaching, they themselves teachers. Or maybe he's taking some other source. He has a number of books in his home which he reads right from his early days. But suppose you find a student who has none of these options at his disposal. But the moment you teach a lesson, immediately he grasps it. He can grasp in a very extraordinary manner. So Vedanta will tell you, Buddhism will tell you, it comes from previous samskaras. You will never be able to feel at home in the company of new ideas if you are totally alien to those ideas. You feel a terrible distraction. feel like going away. Vedanta is terrible, it's a torment for those who are not ready for it. There are wonderful things everywhere, but instead of that you listen to this, nothing very entertaining about it. If you can listen to great ideas, your mind has already evolved to some extent. Not necessarily in this life alone, but in previous life. So Patanjali makes this an important point in commentaries also. See, this, what is called vritti sarupya, means if you don't have any previous samskaras, then your mind totally absorbs in what you see around you. Your mind takes the form of whatever you are seeing around you, what you are experiencing. But if your mind goes in the direction of something transcendental, something much more profound, against all the common logic of relativity, then you find it is come from previous life cycles. That's the meaning of reincarnation, law of karma. So when you are born again, you are born with this baggage of samskaras. It's not in your choice. And those samskaras will make you move in one direction. If you have a lot of spiritual samskaras, you feel a natural affinity, you feel at home when you are interacting with spiritual ideas. That's what happens. Okay, thank you. So we'll continue our discussion in the next class, next Friday, 7:30. You are most welcome. If those who are interested, you can buy this book from our bookstore. One very reliable translation is the Vivekachudamani, translated by Swami Tattwamayananda. Not a very big book, a small book you can get in our own bookstore. You can buy online, savedanta.org, or you can place an order. You're most welcome. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.